Alright, so Whole Foods. The idea behind them, right, is that it's more natural and it doesn't use any chemicals or, genetic modifications to the original whatever. But the problem is that all this is like sort of like a propaganda-ish type thing. Let's look at it, but let's pull back from the whole issue of Whole Foods for a minute and talk about evolution, right? And whether or not you're a proponent of the, highly debated evolution topic doesn't matter because, the facts for evolution are present in everyday life, right? Like, you adapt to different situations, you act differently now than you did when you were younger, things like that. That type of, basic evolution, right? That's something that exists in everybody and everything, right? A dog acts differently after it's been abused than it had before it was abused. The same way that it can act differently if it's treated well than it acted when it was treated when it was abused. So it exists in animals, humans, dogs, other animals. It also exists in plants. You just don't see it as much or very often, right? Plants aren't very animated. So, but there is evolution, right? The corn that we're eating now is not the same that would have grown, 10, 15,000 years ago. Even though the process is slower for plants and things like that, it's still a very involved process. It is still like a changing process. Plants are unique because just like, we are what we eat, the plant works the same way for plants. You know, depending on the soil, the acidity, the water, how much it's watered, how much sun it gets, things like that, the types of minerals that are in the soil around it, all those affect a plant. The easiest example that comes to mind is like marijuana. Like you can look up, people that homegrown marijuana over in California and stuff, and see all the different things that go into producing and how that changes the environments that the plant is produced in, changes the actual chemical composition of the plant by, either creating more THC or bigger plants themselves, etc. Now, the idea behind Whole Foods goes against this completely, because you have Whole Foods because, on the other hand, you have something completely different, right? You have capitalistic type giant agricultural companies. And the idea is to combat that. We don't like that. They, modify their plants, giving them gene therapy, all these different things. We don't like them. They use pesticides. Excuse me. But those are actually just examples of evolution. They modify the plants to grow bigger. They modify the plants to grow faster. Things like that. These are things that would actually occur in ideal settings in the real world. They just haven't occurred. There's nothing really wrong with it. Kind of hard to support that with facts and things because I'm lazy, but yeah, basically the way capitalism works, and the reason that Whole Foods are more expensive than corporate foods is because they cost more money to make. Now, these big corporate farms put a lot of money into researching different ways to make these crops grow faster, to require less nutrients, and to provide more nutrients. Okay, and the reason that they're successful, the reason that we have, that most of the food in America comes from these corporate farms now, is because they're successful. And in the capitalist world, for something to be successful, to make money, it has to work and it has to make sense. Okay, you don't really, that's the way capitalism works. The way something succeeds is that it makes sense, that it evolves correctly. One of the more popular arguments for Whole Foods is the idea that they usually don't use pesticides, like chemical pesticides. They use organic alternatives. They put down soil that, what's the opposite word to attract? Repels. insects, bugs, and things of that nature. But when you get right down to it, that doesn't matter. Because people throw around the word chemical, especially, Whole Foods type people. I try to avoid labels if I can, but, they throw around this word chemical, and they throw around, words like pesticide. But they're completely fine with using organic alternatives. And they call it an organic alternative, meaning that it hasn't been produced in a factory or a plant or something like that. But the fact of the matter is that saying something is chemical is almost redundant, and it becomes idiotic at best, because everything is chemical. Everything is composed of chemicals. Chemistry defines life, right? Your body is defined by chemistry and physics and other forms of science, obviously. But chemistry, right? The fact that we breathe in O2 and expel CO2, right? That's all chemistry. There's nothing inherently evil about it. There's nothing wrong with it. And plants work the same way. So people will say, oh, I grew this organically because I imported some soil that isn't native to this area and put it around my crops to keep the bugs away. How is that better than abstracting that chemical from the soil that repels the bugs and then spraying it over the plants? What's better about that? The best example for pesticides is malaria, right? Now, malaria used to be a huge problem in the United States. Huge problem, as big as it is in Africa, right? Malaria is still a huge problem in Africa. So what happened, right? What changed? Why is malaria no longer a problem in the United States, but it's still a huge problem in Africa, right? It's this chemical called DDT, which was designed to keep bugs off of plants. Okay? It worked really well. It killed some birds, though. There were some birds that would ingest the DDT, and their bodies weren't equipped. They weren't evolved enough to deal with the DDT. So it would kill the birds. So animal rights activists got their panties in a bunch, went to Washington and outlawed it. Okay? Now, because of the capitalist system, because DDT was now outlawed in the United States, where people had money and would spend money on chemicals like DDT to help grow their crops, nobody makes DDT anymore because it was outlawed, because it killed birds, right? But DDT also cured malaria because it killed all the mosquitoes and shit that carried malaria. Right? So the reason that we have malaria in Africa but not in America is because DDT killed some birds. Animal rights activists got all butthurt about it and got DDT outlawed. Now, I'm jumping all over the place, but I'm trying to, this is just spur of the moment thing that I'm doing, so bear with me if you even watch this. But, okay, so Whole Foods. We don't use chemically altered pesticides. Right. But once again, we live in a capitalist world. So these chemically altered pesticides that these corporate farms use to keep bugs off my crops, you don't use them. Well, let's talk about what we just learned about capitalism and evolution. Well, the reason these corporate farms would use that pesticide is because it's really good, right? And if a pesticide can become outlawed because it kills a few birds, it's a logical step to say that the pesticides that we use nowadays are way less harmful than something that didn't even kill humans, only killed birds, okay? Saved millions of lives because of it killed malaria. Saved millions of lives, but killed a few birds, got outlawed. The pesticides that we use now are even safer than that. Plus, we wash our fruits and vegetables. Well, that's interesting. Okay, so because capitalism states that only things that are going to work succeed, and because these corporate farms have to use a pesticide created in a capitalist environment, let's just assume the pesticides are really good. Now you can argue, oh, but they somehow get inside the plants and stuff. Well, I guess, but keep in mind that natural organic pesticide that you're using has pretty much the same chemicals in it that the pesticides the corporate farms use. The only difference is how they distribute it. You lay down some soil with the chemicals in it, and well, I've never been to a corporate farm, but they probably have a plane flying over it, or maybe a sprinkler system with it in it. I don't know. So, okay, so we're going off on tangents for ever. But the point I'm trying to drill home, I guess, is that the only difference between the Whole Foods and the corporate farm foods is negligible. The pesticides are negligible because they use pesticides in Whole Foods too, they just don't use good ones, right? Because if the pesticides that the organic growers used were good ones, then the corporate farms would use them as well, because of the way capitalism works. It's just a fundamental thing. Now, what was the other thing? Got the pesticides. The genetic mutation, that ties into evolution. It's not a big deal. Oh yeah. So how does that hurt people, right? Well, I told you the story about DDT, about how DDT is actually killing people in third world countries right now because we outlawed DDT. Okay, well, the same thing goes for these corporate farms, as I mentioned before, have to spend a lot of money researching, right? Like genetic mutation and things like that. They have to actually research evolution, which is a good thing, right? Because we're learning about the world. They have to research that kind of stuff to produce better crops. What I mean by better crops is higher crop yield, right? If an acre of soil, yields up X amount of corn, they want to mutate that to make it, yield 2X amount of corn, right? That's a good thing. It's more corn per available space. They want to make it so that things like corn and carrots and things like that can grow in environments they're not native to. Now that's hugely important. Why? Because there are many parts of the world where people are starving because they can't grow crops where they live. But if we can design crops that grow there, well, we could solve a very serious problem. Now, to do that research, the corporations have to make money. For these corporate farms to make money, we have to buy their food. And sure, the government helps them out with that. Our government gives them money because they realize that the profit margin for corporate farms is not that big. So we subsidize. We do things like that, all in the name of this research, really, because that's where all that money's going, into research and learning how to make these crops better, to make food cheaper, more accessible to people. Whole Foods defeats all of those things, and they try to con people into thinking that it's better for them. It's not. Now, a lot of cases are made like, the typical story goes something like this. Oh, well, this guy, let's just come up with a random name like Jake, okay? So Jake, he's this guy, he only eats Whole Foods, he exercises all the time, he's in really great shape. I mean, look, he's 35, he looks like he's 21. Hell yeah. That's like the whole story, right? He's healthy, he's full of energy, Whole Foods. But no, it's a lifestyle thing. It's a lifestyle thing, right? He has a balanced diet. You know what I mean? If you take all the nutrients you need, supplement yourself with some vitamins, people, exercise a little bit. That's what's important. It's not whether you eat, your corn grown 15 miles away at some hillbilly's place, or whether you eat corn that's been imported from half the country away that was grown at a corporate farm. That's not the important part. The important part is the balance, the nutrition, the exercise. Those are the important things. And people get you to focus on one aspect because, get this, the Whole Foods growers, they're supplemented too by the government, right? If the government's going to supplement the corporate farms, they've got to supplement the small growers. But the small growers don't put any money into research like the corporate farms do. But they do benefit from that research, right? When the research determines, oh, it's better to grow your corn in this type of soil than it is to grow it in that type of soil, these people that have donated no money whatsoever to the research benefit from that. But they don't actually put any money into the research. So they're making more money. And that's not a good thing. It's a scam, is what it is. So, because what those people are doing is they're pocketing extra money. They're benefiting from the research done by the people that are actually doing good things. There's a lot of areas in the world right now where corporations are the bad guys. There's lots of areas. Capitalism opens up that avenue and it's horrible. But corporate farms are good guys. They're trying to learn how to grow crops in places where they can't grow. They're trying to learn how to grow more crops per acre. We have so many starving people in the world. Those are good things. Now think about it. If they had never outlawed DDT, we would be saving millions of lives a year from malaria. Maybe not millions. I don't know the exact numbers. But if one person dies a year from malaria, I mean, that's sad. If one person starves to death a year, even just one, and we can stop that, I mean, that's a wonderful thing. And that's something that we should support. And the only way to support that is to give the money to the people that are doing the research that can make it happen. Okay? Let's talk about technology for a second. Okay? Because all these things, this genetic mutation, this research that's done by the corporate farms to make these products happen, is all a form of technology, right? And Whole Foods is against that. Oh no, pesticides are horrible business, blah, 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 blah. But they don't realize that all they're doing is using old technology. And it's a pretty common story, right? Like, when the Pilgrims first arrived in America, you know, they couldn't get their crops to succeed. They were having trouble with it. Probably because they were a bunch of losers in Europe and didn't know what the fuck they were doing. But nevertheless, right, the natives came and showed them that, hey, like, look, you know, dead fish help your plants grow. That's a form of technology, right? All these things. You know, you need to plant your soil in this. You need to not overuse the soil, not abuse the soil. You know, you can't just plant corn over and over again in the same field year after year after year. It strips all the nutrients out of the soil. So you have to, like, switch around the soil you're using. Once again, I'm not a farmer, so I don't know all the details, but the point is those are all forms of technology. And the people that market Whole Foods and things like that, they are using this technology from 150 years ago, and they refuse to modernize. We've made so much modernization in the past 150 years, and they just refuse to accept some of it. They just say that, like, oh, well, this technology is bad for us. Because if it wasn't bad for us, think about it. These small farmers, they would have no way to make money. Right? That's why most of the food in America comes from corporate farms, because these small farms wouldn't be able to support themselves if this was not the case. If they couldn't sell this whole, like, organic whole food scam to you and make you pay twice as much for the food that you could have gotten. And not only could you have gotten it for half as much as you bought it from the Whole Food people, but you would also be doing a good thing by supporting research that's going to, in the end, it's going to lead to less people starving to death. And it's going to have positive side effects, like us learning more about genetic mutation, which, by the way, just at the very end of this, I'll just throw this out there, guess what cancer is? Cancer is genetic mutation. Okay, now humans and plants are completely different, but the more we learn about this process, the more we're going to understand it, the better that we can deal with this kind of stuff. Cancer is when genetic mutation goes wrong inside your body. Okay? If we could figure it out, we could get rid of something like cancer. Okay? Which is a first world problem, by the way. Third world problem is like dying from malaria. But the first world people didn't want those poor birds dying, so goddammit, those African people are going to die from malaria. Okay? First world problem is cancer, because we live long enough to die from cancer. Because we have things like corporate farms. Now think about this real quick. Sorry, I thought that was going to be the end. But, I mean, if we go back, right, like 150, 250 years ago, when all the food was like whole food, organic food, you know, people didn't live as long. And I'm not saying it was because they only ate whole foods, but, you know, we have so much more food now. You know, the poorest people in the country are also the fattest people in the country. That's not a good thing that they're fat. But it's a good thing that we have enough food to do that. And if we continue supporting these companies and we continue putting money into that research, guess what? We are going to make it to where that starving kid in Africa or Somalia, is Somalia in Africa? I think it is. My point is, we can give those kids the option to be fat and to not starve to death. I'll have to work on people getting fat, but it doesn't have anything to do with growing crops. It has everything to do with what we do after the crops are grown. Anyway, I'm done.